start with a quote. Um, I raise up my voice not so I can shout, but so that those without a voice can be heard. That's Malala Yousafzai. And March is both a Women's History Month and 8th is International Women's Day. So we have our dear friend Swati Narayan, who is the director of Daya, and we're discussing the wins we've had as AAPI women and the challenges we continue to face, including some of those who are often existing on the margins. So let's get started, Swati. What is his? I didn't even know. What is the history of Women's History Month and International Women's Day?
Sure. Actually, you're right. It is a gloomy day. I remember last time I was here, it was, bright and sunny. But it is Women's History Month, and at the end of this week, it'll be International Women's Day.
All right.
So, International Women's Day actually started, in the early 1900s, maybe even the late 1800s.
Oh,
and
okay.
And it was started by women activists, especially in the labor, people working in labor. They were sort of arguing for improved labor conditions, working conditions, and they sort of, convened. And it was really around the end of February where this happened, but that was according to the Julian calendar.
Okay.
And now, we do things, with the calendar that we have, but and so the first meeting actually had around 100 women activists. There were a few women who were in places of government. Most of them were advocating for, like I said, better working conditions, better, opportunities to be able to represent and to be in places that they weren't. We know what a challenge it's been for women.
Right.
And so, that's when International Women's Day sort of kind of came together. And I think the day that they sort of attribute to the first time it became sort of a global movement was the year was 1911. So it was March 8th. So its origins are actually quite old.
Oh, yeah.
And then in 1987, U.S. Congress passed a resolution marking March as Women's History Month.
Oh, wow.
And it only makes sense. We have March 8th as International Women's Day.
Yeah.
And, in order for anything to get done, you have to have, women sort of leading the effort, right?
Right.
Because otherwise, for so long, even though women were doing so much of the work, they were often silenced and not given, a seat at the table.
Right.
And we know that in many places that's still a challenge, but we also know that because of this advocacy, we're in places that we hadn't been
Yes.
Years ago.
Right. That's amazing. Okay. So, how can International Women's Day and Women's History Month be used as platforms to highlight the contributions and challenges faced by AAPI women, especially those who advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Yeah, so as International Women's Day has evolved over the years, the decades. Each year they sort of attribute a theme that they aspire to.
Okay.
And so this year's theme is Inspire Inclusion. And when you think about inclusion, it's not just including you or including you, but the goal of inclusion is a sense of belonging.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
And so actually in my role at Daya, I have a broader role around AAPI community safety.
Okay.
So it's not just the South Asian It's not just the South Asian subgroup, but the larger AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander umbrella.
Okay.
And so we look at issues of community safety, all to sort of elicit a sense of belonging. Because honestly, if we all feel like we belong, we feel safer. We're accepted. We feel like we're part of the fabric, right?
Right.
And that's really what this is all about, is that women have been part and parcel of everything good that happens. And when leave them out of the equation,
Yeah.
there's never going to be balance,
Right, right.
And you know, when you think in terms of economies, when you think in terms of healthcare, and you have to have women who are part of those conversations, women who are helping lead the efforts.
Right.
You can't have a robust economy without having women, you know, as part of the workforce.
Right.
And so when you think of, you know, using sort of this month, or actually International Women's Day, as a platform, you know, it kind of brings together under, you know, the banner of like Inspire Inclusion, opportunity to amplify. Oh, I can't speak this morning. Amplify voices, right? There are, you know, we were talking about how so often women have been silenced. It's an opportunity to come together and share those stories of women. You know, I know Tisha has been here often as a representative of Daya, and she and I were talking last week about women and cooking and recipes, right? And when you think about it, you know, and the way gender roles were assigned from millennia, women were sort of in charge of, you know, not just the cooking, but the nourishment of the family, right?
Yeah.
And when they did this, they would also sort of, they were the ones who were familiar with the flora and the fauna of wherever they lived. If there was a famine going on, if there was war going on, they knew that in order to be able to you know, provide food for their families, they were going to have to conserve somewhere. And so those recipes reflected that. So in a sense, recipes are also written record of what was going on historically at that time, right? So that's sort of how women have also sort of been preservers of histories.
Right.
And so when you talk about using these platforms to sort of amplify those voices and highlighting intersectionality, and that's a big part of you know, thinking about women, right? Because we don't just wear one hat. I'm not just a woman. I am a mother. We are all, we were talking about it, we are all boy moms here.
Yes.
You know, among all of us, we have like 7 boys, you know? But so, you know, being mothers, we work in different fields. And so, you know, to not just look at women as monoliths, but all the different sort of intersections that they, you know, represent is really important. You know, also using these platforms for an opportunity to educate or spread awareness, like we're doing today. It's kind of nice, you know. Now with social media, you have the hashtags. But with those hashtags, it allows you to kind of search and see, you know, like what organizations or who is doing what under anything that you find important, right? Whether it's, you know, pay, whether it is healthcare, whatever the case may be, you can search hashtags. Advocacy and policy, right? This is also a great opportunity to advocate for the gaps that you know, we still face. You know, we've made strides, we've made huge strides, and we shouldn't forget that. And that's part of what International Women's Day is about, celebrating, you know, our many victories. But we still have such a long way to go. Like we still don't earn the same as as our male counterparts. Celebrating our cultures, that's another, you know, big part of using this platform, and, you know, and then community outreach.
Right.
And I think we as women also has evolved a lot, because now when I look back, just us ourselves, you know, our conversations have changed. We talk more about what's happening in the community, what needs to be changed, and we talk about a world, you know, the events that's happening around the world as well. And just yesterday, I was just looking at, you know, Leila and Irfan were having this conversation about the elections. So before, like when you think back, it used to only be the men who would talk about politics or business. But those, conversations have changed. Like she's having a conversation on the elections, on the campaigning, things like that, which really do matter in our community. So it's not only about talking about our families or our children or, things that we bought, materialistic things, but talking about things and topics that really make a difference. So I feel that has also changed a lot.
And it's
evolved
funny
for us.
because yesterday we were talking about the ballot and how things work, and I have voted before. But this time I learned something new. Like when you decide a party, those are the only candidates you get, which made me realize I haven't voted for this section before. And
You voted in the primaries.
Yes, primaries before. And I'm like, why? Like as women, this is something that we worked hard to get, right? To get our voting rights. So I'm like, but that was a great conversation yesterday, So yeah.
That, I mean, women suffragists have fought long and hard, literally just to have a seat at the table.
Yes.
Right.
And it's not just talking about elections.
Yeah.
But women running for office.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean,
Yeah.
We've got a female vice president.
Yes.
And
And that's never happened before.
We have so many Congress representatives in Congress who are women, school boards, city council. I mean, every sphere of where people can be elected, you have women
Yeah.
who are starting to use their voice, and and when you talk about representation,
Yeah.
I mean that's a big part of it,
Mhm.
right? Being able to see someone who looks like you, or someone
exactly.
who can reflect your values,
Exactly.
making decisions for for everybody in that community or wherever that elected officer may be, right?
Yes.
So we have gone beyond being homemakers and to occupying almost every space that we can.
Yeah. But it's because of these women in history, right?
Yeah, I mean
So-
it is. It's because of and who kind of demanded
Yeah.
that they be allowed to.
Yeah, like and who did raise up their voice, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean,
that
and
was
it astounds me. Last week, my husband and I had gone to this event where they were talking about women in business and how like when you have all these women entrepreneurs, how little seed money they get for whatever their ideas are compared to men, but women businesses succeed almost 80% of the time.
oh wow.
Over
Yeah.
these sort of male-founded ideas, and so
That's interesting.
and some of that is because of the lessons that we've learned.
Yeah.
In terms of being in the spaces that we've occupied, right?
Yeah.
In community, understanding how we talk to each other, what the needs are. Like it's just we're able to bring that in a business sense.
Right.
And I say this, I mean, I'm not in business, but you are,
Yes,
right? And
yes.
so you bring a lens that perhaps men aren't able to, just because they're not privy to some of those spaces.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's the lack of the soft skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just gonna the softness, and that can be an advantage to understand, right? The employees, those issues and everything else.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So in what ways do the themes of inspire, inclusion, and women who advocate for equity intersect within the AAPI communities? And how can they empower AAPI women to advance social justice causes? That's a deep question.
It is a deep question, and it kind of touches on a lot of the issues or a lot of the themes we've talked about already, right? When you're in a community and you're not just included, right? Like, it's one thing if we're sitting at a table and it's a table full of men, and they're like, "Fine, here's the token woman," and but they don't listen to our ideas.
Yeah.
They don't include us in their, whatever planning sessions or whatever they're doing. That's just performative.
Right.
That doesn't
Do
do
anything.
anything to advance,
Right.
Any sort of a platform.
Right.
So, the goal is always to have that sense of belonging and to be accepted. And in order to be able to do that, you have to have an exchange of ideas,
Yeah.
an exchange of an understanding of different value systems.
Right.
Right. And so, we think in terms of equality, which we want, but we also think in terms of equity.
Mm.
And there's a big difference between the two, right?
Okay.
Equity is recognizing that some people face more gaps or more barriers than other people do, right? If I might be 5'2", you might be, 5'6", you might be 5'8". I'm just saying,
Yeah.
right? And let's say something is 6 feet tall, and somebody gives all of us 3 feet so we can see it. Well, it'll help you, and you may be able to see it, or I don't know, you're the tallest, right? So maybe you'll be able to see it. But you'll still be a little short, and I'll still be way short because, even though it's an equal amount, it isn't enough because I face a more significant hurdle because I'm shorter than you are, right?
Right.
And so that's sort of what equity is, making sure that people have the resources they need so that they can thrive, and those resources may be very different for different people.
Right.
So when you think about social justice, that's really sort of the basis for it. That understanding that everybody, every group, sort of has different barriers,
Mm-hmm.
and so when you think about inspiring inclusion, you want to make sure that having that woman be part of it is not just, okay, you're here, but how are you changing the narratives? How is what you offer or what you talk about going to change the narrative so that everybody can, rise up together? Right?
Yeah, definitely.
So again, and it brings up issues of intersectionality, which we talked about. Coalition building, that's something that we women are so good at, right? We working in a silo will only get you so far.
Right.
But bringing people together, like you guys do,
all the time.
every week,
Yeah.
Here, this is what it takes. You
Yeah.
cannot do it alone.
Right.
And then, and it all leads towards more advocacy towards policies that, bring all of us up. What is the phrase, a rising tide brings us all up, or something like that? You have to have enough for each one.
Yeah, to go. Yeah.
So, and then it empowers the community as well, right?
Right.
And that's a really important part
Mm-hmm.
in advancing social justice, especially in our AAPI communities, right? It's we, as we are growing in numbers here in this country, we've made a lot of strides, but we still face significant hurdles,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The newer immigrants. Just being able to understand how to navigate
Yeah.
a new city is difficult enough.
Right.
So being able to have women who are sort of part of that effort
Right.
is significant, is important.
Can you discuss notable historical figures or movements within the AAPI communities in the United States that have paved the way for greater inclusion and equity, particularly in relation to women's rights?
Wow. There are a lot of women, who are notable, right? There is Yuri Kochiyama. She was born here in the U.S. She was of Japanese descent, and she actually did quite a bit of work. Her activism sort of inspired the end of the Japanese internment camps. Grace Lee Boggs, she was of Chinese descent, and she was a huge civil rights activist. And what both of these women sort of realized is that you can't just stand up for your community. You have to have solidarity with other marginalized communities. And so they did a lot of work with Black communities. Some might even say they were the precursor, because this work was, they were in the 30s, 40s, 50s. They were, and then in the 60s as well. Some people might even say, Yuri was sort of a precursor to the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah.
Some of the ideals that she embodied and espoused. And then, there are organizations like SALT, South Asian Americans Leading Together, that sort of, tried to bring, and they still exist, bring the South Asian community together under issues of social justice and places in areas where we didn't have a voice before.
Right.
Even Vedanta, Swami Vivekananda actually came to the U.S. in the 1800s. Late 1800s, he came. There was some big convention in Chicago, and so he came and he spoke about Hinduism. But really, the Vedanta movement was sort of founded around that time, early 1900s. But it was a place not necessarily for religion, but a place for people to talk about, we call them progressive ideals. They really should be, I hate saying that they're progressive. It should be the way it is.
Right.
But, sort of to talk about women and rejecting the gender norms of that time. Pramila Jayapal. She was the first South Asian woman elected to Congress, and she has fought hard for immigrants and refugee rights. Kamala Harris. We talked about her, and she's of Black heritage and also South Asian heritage. But just having her in the White House speaks volumes about where we have come,
Right.
Sort of leading the way for women of, again, different intersectionalities to have a place and a voice in places where we didn't before.
Yeah, it's good to see that we have South Asian women, included in this, because many times it's there's not that many that get involved or things like that. So it's very interesting to learn, what you've been telling us so far, because I'm sure we were not aware of that. And listening.
There's so many more. And even you can look at people like, Minnie Tamaraju, who she had worked in Hillary Clinton's campaign, and she also is now the president, I forget the title, president, CEO, executive director of NARAL, which is women's reproductive rights. It's a huge organization, and she's leading it. Sonal Shah, who is the, again, I forget the title, forgive me, president, executive director of Texas Tribune. There are so many in the Justice Department. There are so many women of South Asian and Asian descent who are, now sort of, leading the way, shattering those glass ceilings,
Yes.
Right. Absolutely. We're going to take a quick break and we will continue this conversation right after the break. Welcome, Houston, to Chai Time on 103.5 FM. We are in conversation with Swati and we are discussing Women's History Month and International Women's Day, and I'm learning
And
so
just
much.
one-
And
Women
I'm loving
and
this
Rom-
conversation,
Yeah,
truly loving it,
talking
because
about women.
you know, you really like, I'm learning so much in this half hour. We
Right?
were, yeah, and then
Yeah.
even off air we were talking, and
Yeah.
it's amazing.
And every time I would say something, I'd be like, because we can write volumes, right? We
Right.
can write volumes and volumes and still not talk about all of the women who, have gotten us to this point,
Right.
where we are today.
Yeah.
And including our own like family members, right? I
Right.
mean, all of them are sheroes in a way, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, because it took so many of us, so many of them in the past, to be able to. I mean, just think about it. None of us would be where we are today if it weren't for the actions of all of the people before us, right?
Right.
Including all of those women.
Right, absolutely. And so, how do cultural traditions and heritage influence the experiences and leadership roles of AAPI women in advocating for equity and inclusion, both nationally and within the local communities?
Wow. Well, I mean, I think we talked about that, when we were talking about some of the leadership that we see.
Yeah, right.
Um,
We spoke about nationally, yes.
Yeah, we spoke about it nationally. I mean, locally. I mean, look at what you guys do here. I mean, but that's important. You bring these voices together. I think
Yeah.
about Rachna. I think about all of these people who work in nonprofits, these
Right.
grassroots
Yeah.
organizations, especially the women who are, I mean, I think about our staff and our team and the way they show up every single day for people
Right.
they don't know.
Yes.
Only hoping, to, make their lives better
Better,
than
yeah.
what it was, right? And that's that cultural nuance that we
Yeah.
bring at Daya, that we can kind of understand the background and the
Yeah.
Yeah.
the cultural specificities
Yeah.
that come with being a South Asian. I think it also helps, in terms of, we sort of look at our own resilience and perseverance that we've had to have over, generations. And this one leads me to something we were talking about over, during the break. In this conversation, you can't dismiss the impact of artists, musicians, actors, actresses. I mean, just look, Never Have I Ever was, a big part of, I mean, it was like a #1 show for a big part of the
Yes,
summer, right?
right.
I mean, when I was growing up here, if I would have been able to see, another high school kid who was of, South Asian descent and like, what she was going through and what her family was going through. But I think it helps normalize our experience to people within our community, but also provides an education to people outside of our community so that, we all can be like this collective, larger community.
Yeah.
But then, and that's really how you have these cultural shifts. It's through art.
Right.
That's where the masses are really moved, right?
Right.
And I think we were talking about
Prachi Gupta, her book,
and
yeah.
her book, They Call Us Exceptional. For those of you who haven't read it, Prachi Gupta wrote a book about her journey as a South Asian woman living in the U.S. and dealing with abuse. And one of the things that she alludes to is sort of the I'm trying to blank now. The colonialism that is baked into how our families sometimes see discipline, and how they see themselves, and also the intergenerational trauma
Yeah.
that has been a big part of what many families hold and carry. And when we talk about resilience and perseverance, and wanting to break that cycle of intergenerational trauma, again, it comes
Yeah.
back to, what we do as women, to recognize the harm and change it, and, trying to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, her mother herself also trying to make that change too, right? It wasn't easy because you're torn between your kids and your husband, right? So and she herself didn't know what she was going through, didn't understand that till, as the years went by, then knowing that, okay, and with Prachi being more exposed to the world or meeting new people, things like that. But it was such a dysfunctional family that, sometimes we don't realize that, and being able to come out of that and actually share the story, because like I said at the end, just realizing that this was for herself.
Yeah.
It initially wasn't, but it was for herself and for every, anyone who's going through that, to say, like, change can happen, and
Yeah.
being like you said, being resilient. So
Well, and I think she initially, as we were talking, she initially wrote it sort of as a love letter to her mother.
Yes.
But then it became very therapeutic for her.
Yes.
Right?
Mm.
And sadly, we don't know what her mother's response is, right? Like, her mother still hasn't responded to it, and that's sort of the issue that still exists, right? Even though she understood, you were talking, like, even though she understood that, okay, there's abuse, or this isn't quite right, the decisions she made were still based on, what had been passed down to her.
yeah.
And sometimes making those changes is difficult. I mean,
Right.
there's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Yeah, because we always say keep the hope, right? Keep
Yeah.
the faith, keep the hope. But then sometimes that just, I don't know, it's just,
It's funny you say keep the hope. So the colors for International Women's Day are purple and green.
Mhm.
Purple sort of, inspires activism and solidarity and loyalty, but the green is about hope.
Mm.
Keeping that hope, right? That, one day gender equality, gender equity will exist. One day, these are all aspirational,
Yes.
but hopeful.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
one day, all of it will exist. Prachi she's an author. She's also an award-winning journalist.
Yes.
I think,
Yes.
and so and there's so many. You were talking about women who have sort of led in the space. I mean, if you were to Google, and I'm just saying South Asian right now,
Yeah.
but if you were to even Google AAPI, artists, look at the Academy Awards last year,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
I mean, it was an AAPI, sweep,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Best film, best actress, and there were more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, again, I mean, all of this really in a short period of time, but still, it was too long,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we're still not quite where we want to be.
Yeah. Like even for us, even this is our 7th year doing Chai Time, and we've come across so many guests, and most of them work, in nonprofit organizations, but majority of them are women.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
we get them on air to talk, and the passion that they bring, like the changes they
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
in the community, or even, and they change us,
Yes.
our perspective.
Yes,
Like
a little.
everyone who comes here from Daya, we learn every single time. Any show we do, we
Yes.
learn something new. Like today, we've learned a lot from you, Swati.
Yeah. Yes.
The thing is, you provide this platform.
And the topic y'all touch on, which
Yeah,
is
but
so important.
It is, but if you weren't here to provide that platform, then there would be no voice for the voices.
Right.
So, I mean, the kudos go all the way around.
Yeah, I
Right.
think
Like,
Yeah.
Yes.
we can't do this
Without
work
each other.
without each other. We can't
Yeah.
do it in a silo. We have to be standing.
And
with
that I
each
think
other
that's
and
what,
up
yes,
for each
and
other.
that's what, like, women need to lift each other.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think that's what, like, it's been 7 years and we've had our journey, but I think that's what I feel like we're doing in some sense, right? We're always talking about lifting each other, you know, and I just love that. And and the byproducts is, of course, for us, we are learning and growing, and hopefully other women are too, right?
And and we're having this conversation about women needing to do this for each other. But really what needs to happen more than anything else is men need to be doing this. Right?
Yeah.
We I mean, men just need to recognize that
The acknowledgement, I think, too.
yeah, or
But I mean, think about, like, for us, yeah, men, but I'm thinking, like, how can we make a change? We're all boy moms, right? So since we are doing this, somehow we are passing it to our boys. So again, we are hopeful that there is some change going to come about, right?
yeah.
So,
I mean,
yeah, hopefully,
all of our
right?
boys are feminists. I mean, I
But
know
at least
mine are.
support it, right? They
No,
don't have to be
are.
extremes, but they have to support.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, years ago when my kids were applying to college,
Yeah.
they didn't get into certain colleges.
Yeah.
And if you would, but a lot of their friends who were women did.
Yeah.
And it was you could finally sort of see, and although it's supposed to be blind, the admissions process is supposed to be somewhat blind, there has been a very intentional effort to ensure that more women have an opportunity in places where they used to not have as much
Yes.
opportunity, like
Right.
in STEM, right?
Yeah.
In engineering and math
Mhm.
and sciences,
Right.
technology.
Yeah.
Women in construction. I
Yeah.
mean, it's amazing,
Right.
to see, and what they bring. This, you were talking about soft skills, the savvy, the sort of inherent skills that they bring to the job
yeah.
that maybe a man wouldn't be able to bring.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Just because they haven't had to deal with all of the setbacks that women have had to deal with.
Right. And my son, my 9-year-old, on the other hand, would say that, oh, the teacher always picks on the boys, even though the girl is the instigator. He's like, she's always picking on the boys. And I'm like, it's okay. So they have to learn from now, right?
Yeah.
So how do socioeconomic factors intersect with gender and ethnicity within the AAPI communities, and what strategies are being implemented to address disparities and promote equal opportunities for women?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched upon this, that even though, and I might have some stats here, like when you look at the wage gap, for example, women on the whole still don't earn as much as men. So that's just a generalized sort of way of looking at it. But then even when you break it down under the AAPI umbrella, South Asian and East Asian women tend to earn more than Southeast Asian women and Pacific Islander women. I mean, there's a huge disparity there.
Oh.
And a lot of it has to do with access to education and opportunities. Again, it's, there's a lack of equity there, right?
Right.
There's a lot of barriers to training, to education, health disparities. And we see this again, when you look at sort of immigrant communities and they're not being able to access health care. You'll see higher rates of chronic disease. I mean, just look at where outside of AAPI, look at us in Texas. Texas and Alabama, I mean, we have some of the highest maternal morbidity and mortality rates in the country. You know, in 2024, like that should not be happening.
Right.
The disparities in health are huge, and they end up, you know, affecting women the most. I mean, I could go on and on, but anyway, the ways to sort of combat that is policy advocacy, right?
Right.
So, you know, we have Violence Against Women's Act, we have VOCA, which is Victims of Crime Act, you know, and under that, you know, there's some funding to try to help, not enough. Some of this funding is going to be cut by 40% this year. And so, and it'll affect organizations like ours. And so, and again, who's going to be hurt the most? It's the women.
Women, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you know, communities becoming empowered, having a platform like this where other people can hear about ways to become involved, ways to advocate, you know, for women in places where women, you know, aren't. There needs to be more women in the C-suite. I mean,
Yeah.
just period. Making the decisions. I mean, you don't get anywhere without including half of, you know, the workforce, and that's women.
Yeah.
So you just have to, you know,
Give
start
them.
including them. Start including them in the decision making.
Yes.
If you're not already.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
so I mean, those things are really important. Again, intersectional. I keep talking about intersectionality, but intersectional approaches are really important, especially when you think about low-income, refugee, and immigrant women and sort of the barriers that they face.
Okay.
Sorry.
How do historical perspectives on women's experience, particularly those of survivors of violence and marginalized women, shape the conversations and actions taken during Women's History Month?
So, you know, the whole movement started because there was a disparity, right? There was suffering. Women were, you know, suffering because of weak labor laws. So now, I mean, when you think about where we are, I was mentioning our mortality, morbidity, you know, rate here in Texas is being just horrible.
Right.
Even, you know, kind of look at the work that we do at Daya, right, where we support survivors of domestic abuse and sexual assault. I mean, for them, it's a relentless quest towards dignity, and in a system that often, you know, renders them invisible.
Right.
And the maze, the labyrinth that they have to go through just to be able to have, you know, just to have a sense of safety,
Right.
After
Yeah.
they've fled their you know, abusive situation or dangerous situation.
Right.
And it's just, there's so much bureaucracy. Like, it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
It just shouldn't be that way. We need to do more to uplift our most marginalized, you know. And it's sad because these scant resources that, you know, become available to them, basic necessities, end up being luxuries because they have nothing.
Right.
And so it's those voices that need to be amplified, that we need to remind people of. Like, this is the push. This is what needs to end. That cycle of abuse needs to end. And that comes with education and awareness. But then also those who have, you know, gone through, you know, issues like that, being able to provide resources to them immediately so that, you know, they can start living and thriving again.
So Swati, the position that you have in Daya has just been recent.
It is.
Okay, because yeah.
So The Asian American Foundation is
Yeah.
a national organization, and it came together during the pandemic because of the rise in AAPI hate. And so they started funding a few grassroots organizations around the country. So I think San Francisco was one of them, DC, New York. And, you know, they just provided resources like money here, support your community, do what you need to do so that your community members are safe and have the resources they need to be able to, you know, move out of the plight that they're in. And it was in response to all of the hate that, you know, sort of had risen during the pandemic. Last year, they decided to invest in Texas. So Houston was the first city that they looked at, and they formed. There's actually a TAF partnership among Daya, BPSOS Houston, and Tower Justice Center. And so we all kind of work collaboratively, and I'm sort of the person who brings it all together. And so, and what we chose to do is instead of, you know, calling it anti-hate or anti-violence, we wanted to look at it from the mindset of strength. So we kind of
Love
call it
that.
community safety.
Yeah.
And the goal is belonging. I mean,
Right.
At the end of the day, we all want to feel like we belong. So that's what we work towards.
Oh, wow. Okay. Can you share examples of successful advocacy or policy changes that have been driven by survivors of violence and marginalized women?
What do you think? What comes to mind when you think of this? Like, just think about anything. Me Too movement, right?
Yeah.
I mean that.
Yes.
You know, you had. I mean, it was largely pushed by actresses and entertainers in the people in the entertainment.
But it was
industry.
around the
But
globe,
then,
you
but
know.
then, but you know, all it took were a few courageous voices to say, you know, this happened to me. This happened to me. Me too. Me too. And then all of a sudden, you know, there's kind of like that safety in numbers. I feel seen. I feel heard.
Yeah.
And it was just astounding to hear the stories of how many women had, you know, gone through some sort of, you know, gender-based, you know, violence, you know, sexual assault.
Right.
I mean, it was astounding. But I mean, if you think about it, that's been a big movement that sort of has come to light. I mentioned the Violence Against Women's Act, which I think became law in 1994, then was reauthorized in 2022. That was really important, although for a couple of years it wasn't reauthorized under a previous administration. But this allows for funding to go to communities that, you know, like domestic violence organizations that desperately need resources to be able to help, you know, help their clients.
Right.
Again, you know, the intersectional advocacy that you see among a lot of different organizations, they've led to policy changes. Some of them are tangible, but again, like I've been saying, it's still not enough.
Right.
We still have to push for more.
So, how can individuals and communities actively participate in supporting this movement?
Oh, it's like what we've been talking about, right? Challenging stereotypes, educating our boys, talking to our boys, talking to men. I mean, we women can understand it, but unless men have been a big part of the problem, they have to be part of the solution.
Right.
They have to be.
Absolutely.
Supporting women-led organizations and businesses, survivor-led organizations, trusting them, not asking them to prove, but just trusting them, believing them, educating yourself about issues. I mean, I know I talked about a few people, but there's so many people that you can just, you know, do an online search and see like how many people have been active across to sort of pave the way for women to,
Right.
to be able to lead.
Yeah.
Supporting access to resources. I know. Are we getting close?
Yes,
to
I
time?
didn't really know. I mean,
The time went by way
it
too
went by so
I
fast.
know.
And thank you so much, Swati. Today, like, we learned so much. It's just amazing. You are a wealth of information, and
No,
thank you for coming.
I thank you for giving us this platform all the time, and you guys, to both of you and your whole team. I know some of them aren't here today, but happy International Women's Day.
Thank you,
for
Gigi.
all that you do. To bring us, to bring our world closer, and to make it better for all
Yes,
women.
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, listeners. Have a great week ahead, and next time, same place, same time. Bye bye.